Hello, Trevor.
Hey Jeff, how you doing?
I am doing quite well. I am back in the USSA.
That is awesome. Awesome. After what, 7 weeks in Ireland?
Seven weeks in Ireland. Yes, it was quite a odd sensation to arrive at the home airport, see a vast horizon with the sun blaring down. It felt very surreal. Um, I do not recognize this strange orange orb in the sky.
Yep, it's true. It's true. When I lived in the UK,
Yeah.
I mean, you used to walk outside when the sun shone and actually hold the rays in your hand because they were precious. They were not going to come often, and you should definitely spend your time outside. So
Yeah, it wasn't. We did have some sunshine. It really wasn't full, but the idea of just I think being in the city for so
hmm
much, and the sky was very not generally clear of clouds.
yeah,
So if it was a sunny day, there's still clouds, and just to see a vast open area, and that was just kind of odd. It's also kind of interesting going from Belfast to Heathrow. I think Heathrow, it seems like whenever I've been there, it's been sunny. So I don't know if that's a place where it's more sunny than elsewhere. I don't know. Maybe just a coincidence.
so you flew to London to get to Chicago.
Yeah, it's backwards. It's
hmm
yeah. I don't know if it's worth so. I went to Belfast, so
Right,
I could either fly to Chicago. From Chicago, I could have gotten a direct flight to Dublin,
right.
and then from Dublin, then I could take a train to Belfast or a bus. But instead, I went from Chicago or Peoria to Chicago, Chicago to Heathrow, driving over Ireland or
Yep.
flying over Ireland, and then from there taking a plane to Ireland. Now, what I could have done is I could have flown through Charlotte and from Charlotte directly into Belfast, but it was only a 40-minute layover.
Ooh,
Do you feel lucky, punk?
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Now, somebody said that if you're doing an international flight, they have to hold the plane because of luggage. But I don't know. I really want to test that.
Yeah, no,
So anyway,
I've lost that bet in the past, so I think not on an international flight, but definitely on a one here in the United States. So it's not always worth betting on that.
yeah, it's so incredibly stressful, and so I had to go through security coming back 3 times.
Yeah,
Every airport I had to go through except for the last connection home. And then in Chicago, we had to also recheck our bags.
that's right. Yeah, because you pick them up in international, you go literally back through the system. Yeah,
Insane. It probably we had like I think we had over 2 hour lay. It was a 3 hour layover, like 3 hours and 20 minutes. But in the end, we only wound with like maybe about a half, not even a half an hour before we boarded, and we're grabbing dinner. We only had like after eating, I only had like 10 minutes to actually before we started boarding. It was
yeah,
insane.
yeah. I've routed several European trips through London, and I always try and give like a day lag. So I arrive in London and then I don't leave until the next day, and that gives me time to get a hotel, adjust a little bit to the new schedule, and see London for an hour or two. So
Well, Heathrow is such a jacked up airport. I really thought that O'Hare in Chicago was bad, but Heathrow took it to a new level.
yeah,
I guess I'm getting on a bus and driving around randomly until they finally get to the terminal I need. It's just, I don't know. So anyway, yeah, that I guess airport woes do not make for good podcasts, I suppose. So
well, there has to be a subgenre somewhere, right?
there has to be.
Airport ramblings.
And I didn't search super hard, but man, I could not in Belfast find any sort of immediate like areas that would have RPGs for like a store or anything.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. So,
I guess they're too busy. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I guess they're too busy doing other things.
yep, must be.
Whatever those other things are. But it seems like with England, I wonder per capita. It'd be interesting to know countries per capita what the role playing gamers are. I mean, we can deduce that certain areas of the Midwest it's higher than maybe places out in California. But I kind of wonder what it'd be like for Ireland versus, say, London.
Sure. Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah. Yeah, no,
I guess by Ireland, I should clarify. I was in Northern Ireland, not Ireland.
Yeah.
So for those of you for those out there that demand such a distinction.
Yep.
So anyhow, we talked all sorts of things. I had a recording. You were kind enough to come on. I had this bright idea, and I recorded the video perfectly, just no audio. So
yeah, that was about 3 weeks ago now.
Yeah, if I just would have done the recording through, just done the audio and skipped the video, I think I would have been fine.
Oh, such a shame. Well, that's okay. We can retouch on some topics again. That's not a problem.
Yes, we can, and we'll just kind of like, so some things we may, some things we may not, but that's okay because I really at this point can't remember. It was such a I don't know, such an experience.
Yep.
Experiences between now and then have kind of made things kind of hazy and vague. So, anywho, I know that originally we were talking about you decided to. Well, there's a quote. The quote I heard a long time ago, I can't remember if I used it before, was freedom of the press only applies to those who own a press.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you now own a press.
I now own a press of sorts. Yeah. So I publishing role-playing games and everything has started as a passion hobby, with the idea that I would transition over about a decade into doing it full-time in retirement, kind of as a retirement kind of career. Not that meant that it had to get much bigger or anything, just that the idea was that I would learn my chops as I went over a 10-year period, kind of slowly put things out. And I think actually probably 2 years ago, you and I had a brief conversation about that very thing through text, that you were thinking you were on a similar trajectory. And then about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, things took a decidedly unforeseen right turn, and my time in academia ended. And so I left the university system that I had spent basically my entire adult career in. And I came home because I was remote most of the time, and it needed to come up with something else I wanted to do, and frankly, I was just not interested at the time in going back into academia. I mean, I could have found another job, I'm certain, here locally, but that, I kind of got to a point in my life where I thought, if I don't really, it was a choice, right? I was either going to continue in academia and put a whole bunch of effort into it, and that type of lifestyle is 60 plus hours a week focusing on academics, which is not a bad life, don't get me wrong. I mean, there are many people who do it to great advantage, and it's very fulfilling. Or I was going to pivot and find a way to make producing role-playing material and actually doing the things that I got into academia for. It was the reason I went to college. I took anthropology classes to learn about cultures, to learn about how to write about cultures and things like this. And I could do that full time. My wife was willing to let me give that a shot, and everything. And we didn't think it would destroy our budget in the process, as long as I did certain things along the way, which really aren't the focus of this conversation.
Was that like selling organs?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. We have a board, and we needed to pay off the house before I left academia, which we accomplished. We needed to pay off my car very quickly. We're down to like the last $1,000 on it, so it's essentially paid off. So there were certain things that had to happen, and as long as we could essentially make it finance neutral. I mean, like I said, I was living and working remotely, So I had an entire condo and separate utility bills and, you know, internet bills and everything at this other location where I was teaching. And when you subtract that from my old salary and then subtract the costs of things like the mortgage on the house that I live in, you know, that is our permanent home, and all these other things, if I could get it to be revenue neutral,
Yes.
fairly revenue neutral, then I think my wife and I both agreed that it was worth the risk
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
try
It's
to.
less about how much money you make and more about how much money is going out and you're
That's
spending.
right.
So if you
Right.
can reduce the amount of money you're spending out, you need far less money coming in.
That's exactly correct. And so I was able to do. We achieved most of those goals. We're still finishing up the kind of the last one or two, but it was close enough that we went ahead and went with it. And then last year, I started taking classes in bookbinding. It's always been a passion of mine to make my own books, right? To get back to your quote, and I love making things by hand. I feel that they have a contextual and a textual, you know, textural quality that is unlike anything else. And they're really, you know, there are nice things in life, and then there are really nice handmade things in life. And I've always liked making things by hand. I guess that's as kind of a similar, you know, a simple way to put it is I can. It's not that I am opposed to, you know, the role playing game manufacturer who produces something in bulk in China. Those are often very beautiful products too, but they're not handmade, right? And so there's an aesthetic that I was looking to try and get to in my own work, in terms of design philosophy and the work that goes into the writing, and then I wanted to mirror that with the design philosophy in terms of production. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. And so it's really a personal quest of mine. It like I said, I don't want anybody to think that it's a personal statement on my part as to someone else's work is lesser than that. But I have that driving need to try and produce things by hand. I've always worked with my hands. In high school, almost all of my classes were shop classes or design classes or drafting classes, and or, you know those types of things. So this was a huge. My career was a huge departure from what I was really interested in doing, and it kind of came across organically and by accident. That's like I said, another issue, another story. But so I was taking these bookbinding courses. I was really enjoying them. We were producing Tales from the Smoking Worm. I was producing, beginning to work on other products, a couple of which have come out now. My Smoking Worm monograph zine line, issue one, has been shipping right now. This was one I showed you that it's not quite finished. I need to do some gluing in it, but this actually is a hybrid. It's a risograph print, but it features a lot of handmade things by me that get added to the issue and stuff as I explore that. And so, and then I happened to be looking for a piece of equipment called a book backer, okay, or a backer press. Now, a backer press is a cast iron press. They weigh about 800 pounds. They're essentially one big vise. They have huge cast iron wheels on them and everything. They're beautiful, but they serve a very specific purpose in bookbinding. This is the press that you are going to put your book into before it has a cover attached to it. When it is just signatures sewn together and with some gluing on it and everything, you know, basically the spine has been built. And then you're going to use that to round over the book. So if you find a handmade book or you know a largely handmade book, mostly anything before 1890 to 1910, they have this rounded spine, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so those were had to be achieved by hand. This is one of the last things that books were really hard to automate, and so there were a lot of tools invented in the 1910s and 1920s, and they eventually did perfect it. And now we use something that's called a flat case binding, or a dissertation binding, or a thesis binding. That's a very different type of binding than what I'm talking about. Here we have real signatures, they're sewn together, and you round them. And so I was wanting to practice that rounding technique, and you really need a backer press to do that. So I was looking for a backer press. I couldn't find one. And then I came across an ad, and it just simply said, retired bookbinder, selling all my equipment in one lot, had a list of the main pieces of equipment. There was a backer press in there, and he was less than 100 miles from me. And so I was like, wow, that's like perfect. And so I went and met with him. And indeed, he was this retired bookbinder who had been, that had been his whole career. He had been a bookbinder for 40 plus years. His father had been a bookbinder before him. He had been one of the primary bookbinders at Ohio State University before they, I guess, retired their bookbinding program. Then he'd gone independent, and he had all this equipment, everything I could ever really want to build my own books, including tons of stock, paper and card, what you call core, backer core, which is the cover stock,
Right.
cardboard that you wrap things around, whether it's leather or paper. He had just tons of equipment, and much of it was antique. So there was, there couldn't have been anything that was produced later than 1950. I'm pretty sure most of it, maybe one item, but almost all of it was older than that. And some of it, the big, what they call laying presses or lying presses, these are big wooden presses that you use to assemble books. They were 200 and 300 years old, and easily, right? So this was the collection that I was hoping to assemble, with some extra parts, things I didn't need, but I was willing to take them. And so we made the decision to go ahead and buy his collection in bulk. and it's actually such a big collection that I couldn't bring it home. So it's sitting in a shop just down the road from me, about a mile from my house. And so while I built a garage to fit it and everything. So I have been refurbishing this equipment now since last November. And the first couple pieces I've refurbished are foil stamping machines, right? And so this is a foil stamped sleeve. It seems so simple, right? It's just a piece of cardstock with some gold foil on it, and yet that takes quite a bit of effort to make. So I designed the sleeve, I cut it out on a Cricut. You can automate that, and so that takes a couple hours to get as many pieces as you need. And then with a flat sleeve, kind of the template of it, you can go in and set it up on these stamping machines.
It looks like we're having connection issues. We'll see how that works. Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I have been refurbishing this equipment, and I got to use it in my last Kickstarter. My last two Kickstarters, actually. I had a Kickstarter in December, I think it was January timeframe, for issue 4 of the Tales from the Smoking Worm, and then issue 1, technically volume 1, number 1 of the Smoking Worm monograph.
Okay.
And this sleeve goes in the back of this issue. I haven't glued this one down yet. So actually, I had to basically have the printer double. So it's a 3-fold piece of paper or cardstock, and then that gets glued down, and then the sleeve gets placed, and then that'll hold 18 cards, which is actually a lot of cards. It turns out that they're tarot size, they're pretty heavy duty, but that doubling and gluing that stock really gives it some maybe it makes it about 120 point paper. So it's pretty nice. As a matter of fact, I think, look, I've got one right here. Here's my my personal copy of that. I'll pull it out. You can see it. So this is what it looks like when it's finished. Right. For those of you who are just listening to the podcast, you can't see it, but this is the nicely glued together page. It's got the sleeve, and then that holds the cards and everything. So it came together pretty nice, actually. This was a good test run. Um, and then I did another Kickstarter about 2 months ago, 3 months ago now. I guess it was March, called The Hangman's Garden, and that's the second issue of the Smoking Worm monograph. Slightly different build. It'll actually have two pockets. One, that back page that folds over will just be glued at the edges, and then we'll mount a sleeve onto that, and it'll only hold about 7 cards. And then it'll have environmental cards. So the location, like things I want to highlight on the map and everything, you'll have little cards to show players. So all of this stuff that I'm adding to what is essentially a module or an adventure is there as part of my exploration of what it means to design material for 2 different audience members. Right? You have 2 people, 2 groups of people that sit at a table and run an adventure. You have the person in charge, your game master, your judge, whatever you want to call them. We'll just use judge because it's a simple term here. And and then you have a player, right? Or a group of players. And there's 2 things going on there. When you design an adventure or a module, it is often designed to be just read. Even if the person's never going to play it. As a matter of fact, I've had several people who are in top companies tell me, you really need to write these to read. It's actually why we make them so long, because they read like narratives, because people are basically taking them in as a story, even if they never run them. So they do double duty. I am not interested in that aspect of producing a module. I am interested in someone who's going to sit down, understand what the point of the module is as a judge, run that module for some people, and have them consume it at the same time as the judge does. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. Yeah, the idea is, really what is the purpose? Is it to just to be read and to be an artifact to be pulled off the shelf, or is it something that's meant to be ran?
Right. And so in order to explore how you can best optimize your material, even in a small form factor like what I'm working with, which is 5x8, a lot of things can be done design wise to make things easier for the judge when you have events that are on different pages connected to each other, and also make them better for the judge and the player, so that the judge is not forced to think they need to get a PDF copy and print out pictures and crop them, cut them out and like hide part of it and say, well, don't look at what the adventurers are doing, but this is the bad guy, right? I know it's in a fight scene, but it doesn't have to be a fight. I'm just telling you that. And so one thing you can do is you can produce adventure neutral or motivation neutral artwork. So you just say, this is what this person looks like, or this is what this room looks like, and also make it so that artwork can be displayed to the player, if you don't want to just go theater of the mind, right? And we've seen this in the past. I mean, Tomb of Horrors has that. Expedition to Barrier Peaks has that, and they had those little booklets that came, and you could show them, this is what the hallway looks like. And so the problem with that was you had 4 other pieces of art on that piece of paper, or a booklet, and you just said, don't look at this thing, just look at this thing. And so here, every piece of consumable is a one-off. And so that's why we made it on cards. And so the player can just look at that, and you can even say, don't look at the back, but you can pass it around, right? And people can appreciate it. On the other hand, the judge still needs to see that piece of art connected to, say, a place in the adventure that says, hey, I'm using, the town guard here. This is where they're important. And so we take little vignettes of that and place them throughout the adventure itself. And they're the exact same piece of art. So they're doing double duty, but they're also mentally tying that together for a judge, right? And you can look at a page and you can say, I need these 3 cards on to show my players who's doing what, and things. And so there's a lot of different ways you can think about layout and design, specifically to your advantage or the advantage of the person who's consuming the material to be played. And so that's what I'm really trying to explore here. the bookbinding equipment and everything, the point of that is to have the freedom to explore that on my own. So they don't, when I priced out the these sleeves, to get what I needed was going to cost $750 for these sleeves. These sleeves cost me, just in production materials, cost me significantly less than that. 300 sleeves, which is what I needed for this production run, cost approximately $40 in materials. Now, they took a lot of my time. Like I said, it took me a day, probably 2 days to glue everything together. Stamping, once I got the template laid out, took about an hour to stamp everything I needed to stamp. And so what I've done is what you're really doing is you're shifting those funds from an outside source to an inside source, right? I'm essentially paying myself to do the work and everything, which is not a bad thing. First of all, it's my sensibility as to whether something's acceptable. You don't, and I know people, for instance, on RPG Zines have talked about this in the past, although it's been pretty quiet lately, where they get something and the product they were told they were going to get is not of the quality of what they were told it should be, which can cause a feel bad feeling for both the producer and the people who then get it down line. If the producer is willing to give that to them.
Is that generally over physical components, or is it actually content?
It's usually over physical components. Hey, the printer messed this up. They've told me that this is within their scope of limitations, so they're not going to reimburse me the money, nor are they going to reprint it. And now you are out, $2,000, $2,500.
Ragged cuts on the pages, scuffing, whatever it may be.
That's right. And so by moving production down to me, I'm in control of those decisions, and I can say, then it's on me to say, this is acceptable, this is unacceptable. And I guarantee you the quality issue, what is acceptable to me is far more stringent than what is acceptable to the third parties that I'm paying to do the work, if I had to source that out. So it's really rare to find somebody who cares enough about your product that they're going to call you and say, hey, this is a little off, or, we need to figure out this solution because this is a problem. There are those people out there, but they're generally more expensive, and, because you're paying them to care.
Right.
That's what it comes down to. So by having all of this facility at my hand, at hand, by having my own, I have my own paper guillotine that can take 17 by 22 stock, which is the standard kind of small signature size paper today for modern books, of the size that I want to produce. By having all the binding presses, by having all the things that I need to produce this stuff, I can explore design motifs. How do I present the material best? I can explore kind of quality motifs. How do I get the best quality product for the least amount of investment? Or basically, I'm pre-investing in that quality because I have the tools to do that. So that's the story. It makes me more independent, I think, in many respects, because I can just go down to the store or down to the shop and slam out 1,000 of something if I need it. There are very few things that I need other than the root-based materials, paper stock, and
Right.
and the materials I need to assemble that paper stock. So, and I've been looking at. We have been hearing about supply line shortages, and it is true that there are supply line shortages. That's clearly an issue. But when I go to paper wholesalers, they have all the paper you want in stock, right? So I'm having almost no setback to get custom paper to me, for the most part,
but
in the quantities I need.
Well, I think the thing is too, probably it's not all paper that there's a shortage of.
Yeah.
It's whatever the high volume type paper that, right, because there could be some stuff that could be the higher end doesn't move as fast, and maybe people aren't moving towards that for printing when the cheaper stuff isn't available. So I mean, yeah, really, it doesn't mean all paper's not available. It just means that the paper that of the quality and the type that they're using for like Mixum or
Yeah.
Maxim or whatever it's called, Mixum, yeah.
Right. And so you just have to take it as you can. But it allows me to explore materials. I'm really happy with that. Each product line that I produce needs to have a very specific design aesthetic, and that's an intentional set of decisions. So, yeah.
Well, and I think it allows you to produce a more, we'll call it a premium product in a way that's affordable.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's probably right. And so that initial investment in equipment should pay off in about 5 years in terms of costs that I would pay out otherwise in manpower. and then it lowers my cost quite a bit and allows me to explore less um, less well, higher quality products at a lower cost. So still not in they're still expensive, relatively speaking, but it gives me some options. And as someone pointed out, and I hadn't even thought about this, I guarantee you, I started showing pictures of what I was doing and refurbishing the equipment and doing this foiling and stuff. And immediately a couple of fellow zine producers were like, would you be willing to do something for me? And I hadn't even thought about the idea that I would ever become a service, to somebody else in that respect. But it is possible. And so I don't know how much ultimately that'll make up of my time or income. I don't want it to subsume it, but that is possible. And there's really cool things that I can explore that are otherwise just too expensive to really get into. So, when you start thinking about custom binders and custom hardback books and things like this, and moving into issues of leather and really high-end binding materials and stuff, being able to do it yourself is a real advantage.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I guess that's too, it's like where I think I don't necessarily have the desire to create like a premium product, but some Kickstarters are large enough where they can offer those things. And you may want to say, hey, I want to offer like a leather bound, but you'd be the type of person to go to potentially
Yeah.
and say, yeah, I need and price that out, because it's kind of confusing. I mean, you can set up for some of the smaller presses or even larger presses. They're not really set up to do a lot of very custom stuff, but you could offer those things very easily.
Yes, and they would noticeably look like those things. I mean, I've been surprised at some of the Kickstarters that have leather versus synthetic leather options, and you look at the two side by side, and other than the fact that they maybe chose different color options, they're indistinguishable, right? Those leather products don't feel like handmade leather products should. They feel like mechanized leather products, and that's a totally different aesthetic. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think for you, you're still not necessarily running everything through this mechanical press, right? Because you are still offering, like for Smoking Worm, you're still offering like there's like a two sets of, so like for the monograph was strictly the monograph, but are you planning in the future doing like some product through one channel, the mass production, and then more premium of the same product under the more boutique?
Yeah, so there comes a time, even in a boutique industry, when you do want to recognize that not everybody desires that or wishes to invest the money in that. And I acknowledge that that is a real thing. And so what I generally tend to do, and the thinking so far, has been to offer for instance, with Smoking Worm, the first 300 we have a limited first run that's printed on risographic paper or with a risographic method on high-end archival quality paper. Often has custom features like fold-out pages, things you can't get from a producer like Mixam, and then we design the Mixam version, to be a mass consumed one. It's slightly cheaper, but it's also produced cheaper, and it doesn't have those nice features, and it doesn't have the longevity and stuff. So that's not built into it, and everything. And at a certain point, I don't want to, not to belittle the product, but I don't want to spend all my time continuously remaking Tales from the Smoking Worm #1, right? I mean, that's a great product. We use it, like I use it in my home game just about all the time, almost every session. But and so I think it has a lot of good utility to it, but I don't want to have to spend most of my time reprinting the exact same thing in a limited, in a high quality format. That's done. I'd like to move on to other projects and learn from that experience. So yeah, so we do offer what we call standard versions, which are more mass market, produced. But one of the things I've noticed about Mixam is they do have 110-pound cover stock. Gosh, and I think they had 120 at one point, but 110 is where I've seen it go to recently. And at 110-pound cover stock, it could still, for instance, hold one of these sleeves for cards. And so I think I'm going to do some tests, but I think like the Monograph series may end up in a standard edition, still with sleeves. I don't know if that'll reduce the cost any in the long run, but the 110 cover stock definitely holds up to that. So, and that's a limitation that, like, for instance, risographic printers can't, or as far as I've been told, can't take 110 pound cover stock. They kind of max out at about 75.
Okay.
So, and depending on the printer, on the manufacturer of the paper, 65 pound, 75 pound, 80 pound cover stocks can be interchangeable. It's not they use the term pound, but it's not a universal constant as far as I can tell.
Yeah, from my understand, yeah, each of the paper manufacturers, it's different. Like, and I don't understand. You would think it would be, but it's not. Like a set area of paper and so many sheets, and then what does it weigh? It's what you'd think. You're like, okay, 1,000 8.5 by 11 sheets weighs 50 pounds. Okay,
or whatever it is.
Yeah,
right. Is it a weight thing, or is it? I always wondered, is it a tear test? Like, this paper can withstand 65 pounds of pressure. I mean, whatever it is, the point is it's not standard. And if you have two publishers that say, I have 65-pound cover stock, you should get get some of each and try it against each other, because they're not going to be the same. So
yeah, that just brings funny thoughts in my mind of so I went to a facility that made safety glass for cars.
Yeah.
And they they had a test where they would put the windshield on the ground, has like a fixture for it, and then they had a ladder, and they had like a bearing, a metal bearing that was about the size, I don't know, like of a small orange, and then they would drop it, and then that was how they would determine, how. And it's two pieces of glass that in between it's sandwiched is latex, so that's what binds the two together and keeps everything from coming apart.
Right.
And so that so in my mind now, I'm thinking of the same kind of thing as somebody on a ladder.
It's exactly right. Well, and they've done that like for wood, in the construction industry. I visited a lab at Purdue University in their construction materials department, and they literally had these hydraulic and pneumatic presses and pullers and stuff like this, and they would work out torsion shearing and how much raw energy could a 2x4 take if it's made out of spruce versus southern pine versus northern pine and
Yeah.
everything. And they have these material, specifications for all this stuff. So yeah, that's exactly when I hear pound paper, I think that should be able to withstand so many pounds of pressure or something. But
Yeah.
maybe your weight, maybe it's the weight.
Yeah, but I don't. If it wasn't, it would be simple. And they say it, and it would be the same for every company.
Yeah, you would think. And so yeah, I have no idea. So anyway, to me, this is it's a journey. The production, making things is always a journey. And I think you and I have talked about that. I know you've talked about that with other people in the past. It can be a journey to get it and consume it, but it's a real journey and a process to produce it. And it's a journey that I'm really fascinated with. No matter whether you produce it with a high end paper stock and all these other add-ons and stuff, or whether you're printing it at Mixam, or whether you're hand making it on a photocopier, that journey is important to the individual who makes it. And we're kind of in an industry with the RPG zine indie press kind of industry is one where that journey is important to the individuals who make it. And I think that's a cool thing. And so my goal is to kind of experience it and hopefully not break the bank as I do it.
Yeah, and I think too. I mean, I think you also have a little bit of history with your products, and having a line really helps.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that you can necessarily always predict accurately, but you get a good feel of where things are and where things are headed.
Yeah, I definitely think that the Smoking Worm team has a better idea of how things are going to go today than we did when we first launched issue 1, where it was just like, we were trying to figure out budgets, and eventually I just kind of threw my hands in the air and said, let's just assume it doesn't matter for issue 1. We'll print it, we'll pay for it, and if we make enough money to pay for it, that's great. But if we don't, we still have an idea of how much it costs us to make it, right? And now, I'm finding that I kind of know the page count or the word count that I need to fill 60 pages consistently, and how much my budget for art is going to look like, and things like that.
Well, it is a fair amount of a leap of faith. I mean, you really don't know till you do it.
No, you don't. You don't. No, and I agree with you. And it's every one of those Kickstarter projects and every one of the products that I've produced is a leap of faith. When we did Smoking Worm Monograph #1, and that's an amazing thing to me, is to have people who consume this who are willing to take that leap of faith for you when you can't perfectly describe what it is you're doing, right? I mean, at a certain point, sometimes my Kickstarter comes down to, we have an idea. I can tell you in words what it looks like. I can't show you a picture because I haven't done it.
Right.
Right? You just have to trust that it's going to be awesome.
Right, because I remember, even though I should bring up my much delayed Fane of the Fly God, I kind of would bring it up to people, and it got kind of a lukewarm reaction. But when I actually showed somebody the manuscript, and it was like then it made sense. It's like you can kind of talk abstractly, but once you really see the fruition or the direction or the magnitude, then it becomes something different, and it's hard to grasp. So and similar to these things, well, the sleeves and how they work out, you're like, yeah, so what? But then when you see how it actually looks on a zine and how it folds in and how the graphic of the cards look really nice with the sleeve, and it fits into that little indentation, that face fits in perfectly. I mean,
did that come out great?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, then you're like, okay, now I get it.
Yeah. So so it just takes, and that's the great thing about Kickstarter, is it allows us to produce that product with some support, right? And I think the more of them that you do, the more people are willing to, as far my experience has been, throw you the life preserver so that you can get out of deep water and survive the event.
Well, and I think too is, so when you went to the first Kickstarter, did you have the product done to a certain, what point what percentage of completion did you have the product when you went to Kickstarter for the first Smoking Worm?
Oh, that's a good question. Issue 1, we had rough layouts for, but I want to state outright that what I mean by rough layouts are really rough layouts. I think we relayed the whole thing out during the time of the first Kickstarter, and we had not yet found the workflow that allowed us to how do I want to put it? That allowed us to quickly and easily integrate artwork into a layout. And so, I would have an idea in my brain, and I would do a little thumbnail sketch of what I thought the layout should look like, but the mismatch between and where art should go. And I'm like, oh, that would look cool, and that would look cool, and that would look cool, right? But the mismatch was I didn't yet have the experience to know how many words per page I was going to get on my books. And so I would lay it out and say it needs to look like this, and then we would lay it out and it would not look like that because we had twice as many words as I thought we had. And so we have now figured out that in a booklet like we produce, Tales from the Smoking Worm, you're going to get about 420 to 450 words per page. And so the other thing we've learned is how to lay it out to maximize the impact of the art. I think, for instance, if you look at Smoking Worm 4, the art is, I mean, it's incredible. It really is. It is amazingly, even though it's the last thing that gets produced, it's the thing that drives the visual for the entire issue, and it does it in a really great way. And that doesn't exist in issue 1 because we hadn't figured out how to do that yet. And so those are things they teach you in design school. They talk about, but until you get your hands, muddy, you can't figure them out for yourself viscerally with a specific size product. And I think that's a critical thing to realize, that we work at a very specific size. It's consistent. And I have dabbled with layouts for larger sizes. And then I think there's a whole new learning process that has to happen there too.
Yeah. I think there's some things I'm working on too, where I'm trying to get a more consistent some of the stuff I'm working now on is going to be things that will be coming out consistently, and
Yeah.
it'll be likewise trying to get that format down, because reinventing a format or layout every time is not productive.
Well, I mean, it can work, but you're right. It's time consuming.
Right.
And
So you're playing with font choice, font size. I mean, you start going through all those things, margins, space between columns, I mean, you can start playing around with sizes and formats, and then you just find yourself spending a lot of time. But once you have something kind of down, not saying you can't have variation, it just definitely takes a lot of the trial and error out of it in the exploration phase.
Yeah, and since we're producing a serial, almost like a magazine, right? It's there's issue 1, there's issue 2, there's issue 3, so on and so forth. That format is something that you come to expect, and for readers who have read all those issues, it's something they rely on to understand where they're at within an issue.
Yeah.
Right. And so once you start laying down that visual language, you need to continue that visual language unless you're going to do a big shakeup. And that visual language creates stability, no matter how chaotic it is, no matter how crazy it may look. The consistency of application allows readers to understand it and continue to appreciate it and find comfort from it and find things in it, right? Because they know how to work with it. And so, and that's an important aesthetic when you're creating a serialized publication. So one of the things that we find interesting is working that out differently for each of the different product lines that we produce. So for instance, Smoking Worm Monograph is slightly different. It has a different look. It's much more vertical. and that's intentional. I want it to look different, even though it's the same size as Tales from the Smoking Room. When you look at it, it doesn't look like it's the same size because it looks taller and thinner. So that's a very important design aesthetic, different than Smoking Room, and it's intentionally different, and there's reasons for that. So yeah, you know, those types of things I think really sell the art. In what I mean by art, not just the physical art, but the art of what you're trying to do aesthetically, right? The design, and they help your product,
Right.
and they're fun.
Yeah, I know I went from so like for Journey to the Madlands, I decided that that large format just wasn't tenable to continue. So now I'm kind of looking at rejiggering the whole thing, but yet
Yeah.
still trying to keep the same kind of aesthetic. But yeah, it just wasn't. It's not viable to go that direction.
So what did you find was unviable about it? Because it's essentially an 8.5 by 11 format, right?
Yeah, it's I think I needed a little bit more content. It's just the pricing. I needed to charge I probably needed I think I was charging about $20. I think I need to be charging like 30 for it. It's just
Yeah.
28. Yeah, I need to charge about $28 per zine. And maybe there is a market for that. But that just it just um yeah, it I think really what I need to do, it just needs to be smaller and just come out more often is really what it needs to happen.
Right. And so some of your previous guests have talked about that issue where you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot if you're making your books too big, right? I
Yeah.
mean, too dense, because you could get two zines out of that. And in terms of profit maximization and everything like this, and I think it's important to understand that from a production side of things, you want to make a beautiful product and you want to make a product. That's part of why you're doing this. But you also need to make it in some way profitable so that you can continue to do this, whether
Right.
that's a part-time hobby or it's your full-time job. If you are losing money and if you're selling too many words for the price you're selling them at, you're losing money. Um, that's a problem. And maybe it's a problem you're willing to accept, but it can become untenable over time. And so, yeah, so you've got to figure that out.
Yeah, so I think and I don't regret doing it, but it just and the problem is pricing. And I could price it higher. It's just you don't know. I mean, it's what's hard. I need to have all realities that I can look at. So
Yeah.
there's a reality where I sold it for $25. There's another reality where I sold it for $28. There's another reality. So but the main thing is I really wanted this to be either biannual or maybe even triannual if possible. Triannual.
Right.
And so one is getting other people to consistently write in addition to myself and to get content. That's also key. But the other one is just to get the amount of content under control and also get the costs down. So,
Yeah.
and I think, it comes down to, um, and maybe there's an opportunity for, the boutique, whatever, but and it did sell fine. It made money. I didn't lose any money on it. I was able to pay everybody. It was, it worked out fine. But it just yeah, without it jacking the price up, I just didn't feel like it's viable to continue.
Sure.
And
Sure.
if I jack up the price, I don't know I really want to do that either.
That makes sense. Um, you know, like I said, you got to find that balance. So,
Yeah, and I think I'm going to try. I think what I may also do is try pricing. I may actually try and do the full um range. Well, before it was color, that's what it was going to be. There was no if, ands, or buts about it. So what I may do for the next one is to, if it funds to a certain level, make it color, or go along those lines. Um, and because I've not done that before, pretty much everything was set in stone. it is what it is. But I may allow some variation based on how all the Kickstarter performs to either add some material that's already been written, or to add color, or to increase the paper quality.
Right. Yeah. And those are decisions you have to make, right? And so, what I find interesting is that your average consumer doesn't think of all these little choices that go into how you price things, what the physical realities of your product are and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, and you're right. And ultimately, what I'd like to do is be like you. Everybody wants to be like you.
thanks. Grass
is
is always greener on the other side, though.
Yeah, I'm in a position potentially in about 2.5 years where I can retire from my job. I still need to make money, but I'm trying to get in a position where I can at least get a steady, reasonable income from the hobby. It doesn't have to be a lot of money, but if I can make between 10 or 20,000 a year, um, that would be definitely a feather in my hat and make that decision easier.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of justifies, I think of it like this, we're both married. I've been married 27 years now. I think you've been married about a similar length of time. And, I don't know about you, but I see my mortality on the horizon. It's not imminent, hopefully, but I understand that I probably have less days ahead than I have behind me. And I have to be able to justify to my wife and everybody else that why I'm putting time into this, right? And part of that is the reality of contributing to the family, um, and making it worthwhile. And otherwise, I should do something else. Um, and then part of it
Yeah.
is the argument of this is an internal satisfaction thing. This is like somebody who has a good garden or has a great garden, and they spend all their time in the garden, and they do lots of work in the garden, and they buy plants for their garden, and the plants consume their purchases because they're buying so many cool plants for their garden because they want the garden to be beautiful, and they want to explore it and live in it and work with it. And that same metaphor works, I think, for those of us who produce kind of indie zines, right? Our garden is our library of material and the game we play and things like that.
Well, and I think too is, while we do this, for, many of us do this to make some money at least. Um, there's also relationships that we're building along the way. And it's
Yeah.
also kind of like, I'm not necessarily looking to, exploit exploit might be another thing. I kind of want to do fair to everybody. Like that's really my goal too. It's like, it's not just about making money, but it's actually, you know, being able to afford art and pay an artist for their art,
Yeah.
finding people that write and pay them a reasonable rate for their work, for their writing. I mean, it's all those sorts of things. I want to be profitable. For Madlands, I really want to be profitable, not only so I can make money, so I can pay people really well as well.
Right. And I mean, and so if you look at the number of people involved in like Tales from the Smoking Worm between issue 1 and issue 5, it steadily goes up, right? I mean, it goes up actually pretty quick. And so, we have copy editors and diversity editors, and I have artists, and the stable of artists is changing all the time and growing. And for the first time, I think issue 5, I'll have to think about issue 4, but yeah, I'm pretty much sure that for the first time, issue 5 has a new author that is not part of the original kind of trio. And so, or somebody who is part of our gaming group. And so this is the first time we're bringing in an outside author in. And you're right, you want to be able to pay that author a fair rate, but balanced onto that is a fair rate at what you can afford, right? I mean, there is a limit.
Right.
And so, I mean, when you ask the question, what is fair? I find that a lot of people view it only from the author's perspective. And sometimes in those conversations I try and balance it with the publisher's perspective, right? Which is what you are at that point, and
Right.
say there's a limitation.
Right. And by fair, I mean, obviously, an idea is it's kind of interesting. So like this is a little side jaunt, but so I was listening to a podcast, Enroll Morse's I forget Morse's podcast, uh, the End World podcast.
Yeah,
Morris,
I've never
huh?
listened to it, but
Well,
but
anyway,
it
the
makes sense that
gal
he's got one.
he hired this gal to be his run the business basically, and she used to run an internet or a gaming cafe,
Okay.
and then she stated that well, she ended up and she kind of gave her insights on the whole thing, why she started and how it worked, but she ended up getting out of it because she did not believe that she could continue paying that she could not maintain her ethical standards in compensating her employees, which included paid days off.
Yeah, makes sense.
But here's what I find interesting. Let's say you own a game cafe, and I really want to work at a game cafe, and you say, Jeff, I really can't afford to give you, I can't give you paid vacations, and I can only pay you $11 an hour. I'd be like, okay, that's fine. That's what I really want to do. And I'm willing to, but then you say, well, Jeff, if I can't pay you $15 an hour and I can't give you 2 weeks of paid vacation every year, I'm not even going to have a business. And I'm just going to close the door. I'd rather not have a business than to pay you $11 an hour. And even though that's what you want, it's like,
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting that it's the same thing here. So there are people willing to work for me for like say 3 cents a word, but I really don't want to be paying people 3 cents a word.
Right.
I want it to be higher, but then that's where the Kickstarter I think works out nice. You could say, you know what, I think I can afford X and I will pay you X, but then you can also set up your Kickstarter in a way to say, if it does better than this, then I'll pay you, Y. It goes past a certain point, then Z. And then if you have a very successful Kickstarter, then everybody can benefit from it. But what those numbers are, it's not always clear. And you're right. At the end, it's like I could be one to pay all the people, but in the end, if I'm doing all this other work, there's also a point where as a publisher, I need to be compensated as well.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It's not easy.
Yeah. I mean, what ideally you want the metaphor, or, a rising tide, or
Lifts all boats.
lifts all boats to be a reality, and you need to remember that you're a boat too.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
And so the reality of that doesn't always work out. And so those are the hardships, or trials and tribulations of being a self-publisher. Yeah. And hopefully we're not lamenting too heavily about it. Just acknowledging the reality of it, I think, is important sometimes. So
Well, it is. And I think the other thing too, it's like I got one guy working on a mini adventure.
Yeah.
And I have another guy who will be writing an essay. And so the person writing the venture is going through the crucible.
Yeah.
The person writing the essay is just chugging along because he's going to have a merry old time.
Yeah.
And it's like, and there it goes too. It's like, word count in that case doesn't necessarily equate to, the sweat and the blood that shed. And so, there's also that aspect. And especially if you're saying I want this to be a old school essential style adventure where you're actually cutting the word count down probably considerably over a traditional adventure. And so it's, it's trying to weight all these things as far as what's, reasonable and equitable, but also people are still willing to do it, but you just don't want to be taking advantage of people if you don't. It's maybe not taking advantage if they agree to it, but you know what I'm saying.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. And where that line sits is an important thing, but it's certainly not clear in all aspects.
Exactly. And it's kind of not to get like morbid, but I will go ahead and get morbid. It's kind of like people towards the end of life for their living will, or whatever it's called, when they say, about being resuscitated.
Yeah. Yeah. They have their do not resuscitate orders. And they're like, I understand what it means to do open heart resuscitation, and it means you're going to break all my ribs.
Right.
And I don't want to live like that.
Right. But the thing is, people will make a statement thinking that it's clear. But the problem is when the reality hits.
Yeah.
And the idea of intervening. I don't want, if I'm going to die, I don't want people intervening. Well, what if you're choking?
Yep.
I mean, you could start going down. You realize that you think things are clear, but when you start hitting the specifics, rubber hits the road. You're like, this is not clear.
No, and and at those moments, it's so overrided with emotion, and that it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
To make those decisions, right? And which is why it's really nice to make them in advance when everything's cold
but
and
you
methodical.
can't. Like
But you
giving
really
an
can't.
antibiotic. The person will die if you don't give them the antibiotic. Do you give them the antibiotic?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you say, well, you could withhold the antibiotic and maybe they'll die a nice, peaceful death. But you give them the antibiotic and they'll live. But what this person has Alzheimer's. I mean, it starts becoming a very complicated thing where initially you think something is pretty cut and dry, but it's not. And same thing with this sort of thing in publishing. It's like, it seems like it, but then when you start looking into the details, you're like, there's a lot of complications.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And it's not easy. You kind of have to work those out. And I think the thing is, it's like, I think we all try and come up with, what we feel is right and ethical, and it can vary because it's not necessarily, there is no necessary right answer. And
You're
it's
right.
sometimes you just have to navigate through that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it can be an absolute minefield, right? And what the decisions you make in a moment when there isn't a lot of time to think about it, something just has to be, a decision must be made, right? Because to not make a decision is making a decision in some level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, in the past, mainly because we've been splitting money or doing different things, I've been very clear about the finances. I mean,
Yeah.
everything's laid out because then in Badlands, we split. So I was very clear exactly, where all the costs were and who's been paid what. But, but if I've got a project where I show that, and maybe we're not splitting it, but people are getting paid. But now I'm paying a person to do a map much higher rate than I am somebody doing interior art.
Yeah.
If I only the only one that knows about it, it's not a big thing. But if you want to be open about, how you run your business, maybe you're not going to be showing those things, or maybe you are. But then you start thinking, "Oh, wait a minute, it's like I'm paying this person this rate, this other person's doing me a real good job by going at a lower rate." You realize it starts becoming complicated.
No, you're right. And so, one of the ways that I navigate that is, I always ask artists to set their own rates at the beginning. Say,
Yeah.
what are your rates? And then, and I let them know, there is no disagreement from me that you are worth what you're asking for, right? I fully support that. But I may not be able to pay that. And so let me know what your rates are. And if I can afford that, I'll let you know, and we can move forward. But I'm certainly not going to short an artist and say, or at least I try not to short an artist and say, I just can't pay that.
Well, I'm thinking more the other way. Let's say somebody's willing to do it at a very reasonable rate.
Yeah.
But then you say, yeah, but I'll pay $200 for a map.
Right.
And I'm not saying the maps are, I mean, there's a lot to them. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, but then all of a sudden you're thinking, well, then is it equitable to the, and that's where it becomes hard. But I think that's where Kickstarters are kind of nice. So if you're doing really well on a Kickstarter, you can just pay a person a bonus.
Yeah.
You don't have to negotiate a rate in there. You can also just say, you know what, this is very successful. This person was great and on time. Here, have another $100 or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that kind of pays off with good karma. It carries forward when you can do that.
Oh yeah. I mean, really, you're right. Because I think the thing is it's a lot of trust, all the way around. I mean, you can, yeah, this industry, well, when I say industry, this tiny industry, but it's like I have people doing things. I have people that have done work for me up front without getting paid. I've had people who want to get paid up front. I've had people that want to get paid, half at the beginning, half at the end. I've had somebody who's doing some art for me, well known, but he just started working on it. There's been no money down yet. It's just like there's a lot of variation. So some people are very trusting, but the idea is, if you're wanting to be in any way continue in this industry, you want to be somebody that's trustworthy and that people will want to work with, because people will let other people know when things aren't so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So you're going to be able to get back on track in terms of RPG ramblings now, do you think? Or are you going to pull it back a bit?
You are no, I plan on going full speed ahead. Of course, it's hard to say because I just did this Google Drive thing. Not Google Drive, but Google Meet. We'll see if I can get the splice together. But the plan is to keep the schedule. I like to get a few episodes ahead, or a couple, well, maybe at least 1 or 2 episodes ahead, and keep going.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Well, the being frozen in carbonite was, it's just being gone for 7 weeks is a very surreal experience.
Well, you've lost that time, and yet you were super busy. I mean, it was clear you were busy. But also, I find that kind of time away from things often helps my mind percolate on ideas and everything. So, I mean, hopefully you came back with a whole bunch of notes.
So what did happen is I worked on, so I've got a bestiary I'm doing for Old School Essentials.
Right.
I worked on a second. I did the writing for the second one, so I think I got a draft for most of them on the second, and I might have started kind of outline for stuff for the third. I also wrote a setting. I wrote a enclave for Journey in the Madlands. And so once I got back home, right now, I got a manuscript for Journey in the Madlands for the adventure. I'm going through back working with the author. I got another manuscript. So what's my second manuscript? Another manuscript from another person who is giving me some material. So I went through and we're working through that. And I got a third manuscript for. So I was working for Continual Light. Eric Tankar's, I don't know if you're familiar with Continual Light.
No, I've never heard of it.
So it's basically a stripped down Swords and Wizardry, like very, very stripped down, like very, very, very stripped down. So anyway, so Eric's a very generous person. But anyway, I'm doing the layout, redesign, not changing the text, but complete redo of that. The plan was to launch this for a Kickstarter.
Okay.
But circumstances occurred, and because this was pretty much done, mostly done. I was kind of planning on maybe going to Kickstarter with this in July or August. But then I got a manuscript for a setting for this. Like, this is great. Thrown in, when I say thrown in my lap, it's not a negative thing. It's a very positive thing. It's like I got a manuscript to add to this now. That's a setting, an adventure, and additional rules that needs to be formatted and laid out and edited, and I'll probably commission some art. So now, where this was probably going to be occurring is now going to be, this year is probably going to be occurring, in early 2023.
Sure. So it's going to slow you down a bit.
So, but I got stuff happening. I mean, there's stuff happening. It's just a matter of, so right now, Thane, I'm doing my last pass of my edits. My daughter needs, so the cover art and the layout's kind of been on stall since I've been gone. So I'd like to get that done by the end of the month. The OSE bestiary, the first one, I'm trying to have it all done. And I think about going to Kickstarter with that in July. And then with Thane, hopefully in October. And then Continual Light, hopefully in January. and then hopefully Madlands is a couple months after that, and we'll see
Sure.
from there.
Yeah, that's a pretty similar schedule to what I'm thinking. So I mean, I spent today. I guess I'm 80% done with the Kickstarter page for issue 5 of Tales from the Smoking Worm, and that'll go hopefully live next week. And it's going to wrap up kind of a series of of articles that we've had, and it'll blow out some stuff and kind of clear the air. And then I'm 90%, 95% done on writing for issue 6. It's also been through developmental editing and everything except for one article, essentially, and that I'm struggling with. I just need the time to sit down and focus on it. And then same with issue 7. Issue 7 is 85, 90% written as well. Also has one article that's outstanding at this point. And so those I'm hoping to put out. If I get a Kickstarter out this next week, I'm hoping to fulfill that. This is a much more stripped down single issue Kickstarter. It's not complicated, or it shouldn't be complicated. And so I'm hoping to fulfill it very quickly. So I'm hoping to go to print in July, hopefully, but I set a September deadline for fulfillment because things always get in the way. And so, yeah, so I'm hoping to get issue 6 and 7 out this year too. And then maybe issue 8, which is kind of a holiday themed issue. So it's something we're working on that's a little different, and it's still got quite a bit of writing to do. But then issue 9 is almost completely written as well.
That's exciting.
So what that means is that I'm like only a couple of weeks away from having the next 9 months to a year's worth of Smoking Worms completely written, locked down, and in some form of editing or design. Or a layout, I mean, and then that'll allow me to. There'll be one more Smoking Worm monograph this year. It's well outlined. I've started kind of thinking through it. It's going to be very different. It again is it's not that it's a very involved project, but it's a very different style of project, and so that'll be the last thing I'm hoping to get done this year, and then. Couple of those issues of Smoking Worm will probably be early next year. So yeah, so I got a lot of things on the horizon, and then we have another line of product. Man, I've had the first issue of it done since August of last year, and it's been sitting there while I think about it in how I want to present it and get the format just right. So I talked with my layout person, who's also my daughter, Trevor Stamper, and so we go back and forth on it. And every month or two we pick it up and kick it around and refine it. So anyway, yeah, so there's lots of projects to do.
That's why I would like to be like yourself, where I can have more free time to actually do. I would want to do this for 40 or 60 hours a week, but I sure would like to be working on at least 20 hours a week.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good, sometimes I put 30 hours in, sometimes 40, but I've got a lot of obligations to family and stuff too. So, I'm taking care of parents and things is taking up more of my time now. And so those things have to, all the zine stuff fits in around that. So, right. Having the flexibility.
Yeah, that's what I say. You're flexible now. That's huge.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, and in fact, for me, it's like, I may have all these plans, but it's very optimistic. I think it all works in my head, but reality,
I totally understand. That's exactly right.
Yeah, but, I don't think I'll be going back to Ireland, but that's always a possibility too. So,
well, if you do go back, at least you'll be more prepared for what you're going to experience there, and able to prep for it and maybe take better advantage of your time.
Yeah, well, the I don't say the mistake, but so the nice thing is it was a 4-day work week, but the Monday through Thursday really was working until 5, getting back to the hotel at 5:30, and when you go to eat there, it's an hour and a half to 2 hour affair. So you go out to eat, and then come back come back, call the wife, and then I would go through what the 3 S's: shower, Seinfeld, and sleep.
Yeah.
So that was like Monday through Thursday. Fridays I was just wiped out, and usually Saturdays we tried to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And I try to get some writing in at least 2 days a week, 3. But it was a lot was just spent just walking and looking and talking and to people, and just it was just, I don't know how to describe it. Now I'm sure some of the stuff may not directly ever come out in gaming, but definitely, um, yeah, some stuff will leak out. But yeah, it was pretty surreal.
Yeah, understand. So, yeah.
Well, I think we're probably hitting about the limit. I think you've got duties.
I do.
And thank you for joining me. And hopefully I can stitch this Frankenstein, these 2 segments together as a Frankenstein monster, and it'll live.
Hopefully. If not, let me know. Always happy to come on and chat with you, Jeff.
Hey,
I
thanks
enjoyed it
again.
immensely.
Thanks
Yep.
again, Trevor.